You keep telling yourself you'll move abroad when you feel more confident. You tell yourself you'll do it when you're more ready, more stable, more certain, more fearless. You imagine that one day something inside you will click, and suddenly you'll wake up with clarity so strong that leaving feels obvious. You think confidence is the prerequisite, but confidence is not the beginning. Decision is. Most people misunderstand confidence. They believe it's a feeling that arrives before action. They believe it's emotional certainty, or the absence of fear, or the calm assurance that everything will work out. They treat confidence like permission, like a green light from within that says, "Now you're ready." But confidence almost never shows up first. Confidence is built after commitment. When you look at anyone who has moved abroad, who has rebuilt their life in a new country, who has stepped outside the environment they've always known, what you are really seeing is not confidence. You are seeing someone who decided before they felt fully prepared. They felt uncertainty. They felt hesitation. They felt fear. But they chose direction anyway. You don't need confidence to move abroad. You need a decision strong enough to reorganize your fear. Right now, your fear is organizing you. It is shaping your thoughts, your timelines, your excuses, your delays. It tells you to wait. It tells you to research more. It tells you to be realistic. It tells you that someday is safer than soon. But someday is a fantasy. It never arrives. The people who actually change their lives are not the most confident. They are the ones who reach a point where staying feels heavier than leaving. They decide that the discomfort of uncertainty is smaller than the discomfort of stagnation. Decision changes the internal hierarchy. Instead of asking, "Am I confident enough?" you begin asking, "Am I willing to expand?" Those are very different questions. Confidence seeks comfort. Expansion accepts discomfort. When you think about moving abroad, what you are really confronting is instability. You are confronting the loss of predictability. You are confronting the removal of familiar reinforcement. You are confronting the unknown, and your mind wants to stabilize before you leap. But stability before movement is often an illusion. There is no perfect financial cushion, no flawless plan, no complete emotional readiness. There is always some unknown variable. There's always some risk. The difference between those who move and those who don't is not the elimination of risk. It is the tolerance of it. You don't need confidence. You need tolerance for growth. Growth feels unstable because it disrupts identity continuity. You have spent years building routines that make your life predictable. Predictability feels safe. When you consider relocating to another country, you are voluntarily stepping into unpredictability. Your brain interprets that as danger. But unpredictability is also where expansion lives. Think about every major turning point in your life. Starting a new job, ending a relationship, moving to a new city, beginning something unfamiliar. At the beginning of each transition, you likely felt uncertain. You may not have felt confident, but you decided. And once you decided, your behavior shifted. You gathered information differently. You spoke differently. You planned differently. You prepared differently. Your nervous system reorganized around direction instead of hesitation. Decision activates clarity. Confidence follows repetition. The myth that confidence must come first is what keeps you suspended in contemplation. You imagine that one day you will feel fearless enough to leap. But fearlessness is rarely the gateway. Commitment is. When you decide something is happening, your energy consolidates. Your internal debate quiets. The question shifts from "should I?" to "how will I?" That shift alone is transformative. Right now, you may be stuck in the "should I" phase. It feels responsible. It feels thoughtful. It feels mature. But prolonged contemplation without commitment slowly erodes courage. You begin doubting yourself. You begin rehearsing worst-case scenarios. You begin identifying with hesitation. Decision interrupts rumination. You do not need to decide recklessly. You do not need to sell everything tomorrow. But you do need to stop pretending that confidence will magically remove discomfort. It won't. Even after you move abroad, there will be moments of doubt. There will be days of homesickness. There will be logistical frustrations. Confidence does not eliminate those. It grows through navigating them. Confidence is earned evidence. It is built by surviving uncertainty, not avoiding it. You may also be waiting for validation, waiting for someone to say, yes, this makes sense, waiting for approval from family, friends, or society. But external validation rarely aligns with internal calling, especially when your calling involves deviation from the norm. Becoming an expat is not a culturally default decision. It requires stepping outside collective expectations. And collective expectations often reward stability over exploration. You are not irresponsible for wanting expansion. You are not naive for wanting a different rhythm of life. You are not unrealistic for questioning whether your current environment truly fits you. But the moment you decide, you must also accept ownership. Decision removes the shield of indecision. Once you choose, you are accountable to that direction. That accountability is what intimidates you. Because if you decide and follow through, your life will change. And change is irreversible. You may be more afraid of transformation than of failure. Transformation disrupts identity. It changes how you see yourself. It changes how others see you. It changes what you tolerate. It changes your standards. It changes your narrative. The version of you who has always stayed is familiar. The version of you who leaves is undefined. Undefined feels vulnerable, but undefined also means flexible. You can only redefine yourself when you release the need to feel fully defined before acting. Consider this. What if confidence is not the requirement, but the reward? What if the confidence you seek is built through relocation, not before it? When you navigate a new country, learn new systems, communicate across cultures, adapt to unfamiliar structures, you begin accumulating evidence of capability. That evidence strengthens identity. That identity strengthens confidence. But it starts with decision. Decision is a line drawn internally. It is quiet but firm. It is not dramatic. It is not emotional. It is intentional. It says, this direction matters enough to pursue. Without decision, your desire to move abroad remains fantasy. It becomes something you talk about but do not embody. It becomes a thought experiment instead of a lived possibility. And over time, unrealized desire becomes frustration. Frustration slowly morphs into resentment, not necessarily toward others, but toward yourself. You begin sensing that you are capable of more, but you are not acting on it. That tension accumulates. Decision releases tension because it channels energy into movement. You may believe that you lack confidence because you lack certainty. But certainty is not available before experience. You cannot be certain about a life you have not lived. You can only be curious about it. Curiosity is enough. Curiosity is lighter than confidence. It does not demand guarantees. It invites exploration. If you feel pulled toward living abroad, that pull is already information. You do not need absolute clarity. You need commitment to explore. Many people wait until they are exhausted by their current life before they decide. They wait until burnout forces them. But you do not have to wait for collapse to justify change. You are allowed to expand because you desire expansion. You do not need to prove dissatisfaction to earn movement. Decision is not about rejecting your current life in anger. It is about choosing growth in awareness. Right now, your fear is asking for reassurance. It wants proof that everything will work out. But life does not offer full proof in advance. It offers direction and response. You decide, then you adapt. You decide, then you learn. You decide, then you grow. Confidence is not the fuel, it is the byproduct. If you look honestly at your hesitation, you may realize that you are not actually lacking confidence. You are avoiding commitment. Commitment removes options. It narrows focus. It demands follow-through. It requires behavior change. Behavior change is uncomfortable because it exposes inconsistency. But consistency builds identity. If you consistently move toward expansion, you become someone who expands. If you consistently delay expansion, you become someone who postpones. Identity is built through repeated decisions. You are not waiting for confidence. You are waiting to feel safe enough to commit. But safety and expansion rarely coexist in perfect balance. At some point, you must choose which discomfort you prefer: the discomfort of growth or the discomfort of stagnation. One stretches you. The other slowly shrinks you. When you decide to move abroad, even if the timeline is gradual, your internal posture shifts. You stop negotiating with yourself. You begin aligning your actions with your direction. You begin filtering opportunities differently. You begin preparing instead of fantasizing. Preparation strengthens confidence. Fantasy sustains doubt. Decision moves you from imagination to embodiment. And embodiment is powerful. You don't need to feel fearless. You need to feel willing. Willing to experience discomfort. Willing to adapt. Willing to be misunderstood. Willing to learn. Willing to grow. Willingness precedes confidence. Confidence is retrospective. It is built by looking back and saying, "I handled that." But you can't handle what you never attempt. You are not blocked by fear. You are paused by indecision. And indecision feels sophisticated because it sounds analytical. But prolonged indecision is avoidance disguised as thoughtfulness. You are capable of more than endless contemplation. You are capable of decision, and decision is the doorway. When you truly understand that you don't need confidence, something inside you relaxes. The pressure to feel certain before acting begins to dissolve. You stop trying to manufacture emotion, and you start recognizing that clarity comes from movement, not from overthinking. There is a hidden cost to waiting for confidence. The longer you delay decision, the more your imagination works against you. You begin constructing elaborate scenarios about what could go wrong. Your mind becomes a rehearsal space for catastrophe. You start living the worst-case scenario in your thoughts without ever testing reality. And because you never test reality, the imagined risks grow larger than the actual ones. This is how fear gains authority, not because it is accurate, but because it goes unchallenged. When you decide, even quietly, that expansion is happening, fear loses its monopoly. It no longer dictates the direction of your life. It becomes a companion instead of a commander. The interesting thing about relocation is that it does not demand perfection. It demands adaptability. And adaptability is not built in stillness. It is built in exposure. The moment you begin engaging with a new environment, you start recalibrating. Your brain forms new connections. Your emotional tolerance increases. Your identity becomes more flexible. Flexibility is strength. Rigidity feels stable, but it fractures under pressure. Flexibility bends and returns. When you choose to expand into new territory, you are strengthening your psychological flexibility. You are teaching yourself that uncertainty is survivable. That lesson alone is transformative. Many people spend their lives trying to eliminate uncertainty. They structure everything around minimizing risk. But minimizing risk often minimizes growth. It narrows your world to what is controllable. And what is controllable is usually small. The world is not small. Your life does not have to be small. But small feels manageable. You may be asking yourself, what if I move and it's harder than I expected? It probably will be. There will be challenges. There will be disorientation. There will be moments where you question your choice. That is not evidence of failure. That is evidence of transition. Transition is messy. It is rarely elegant, but it is fertile. When you relocate to another country, you are not escaping discomfort. You are choosing a different kind of discomfort. Instead of the slow discomfort of stagnation, you experience the sharp discomfort of growth. One dulls you, the other sharpens you. And sharpening is uncomfortable before it is empowering. You must also understand that your fear is trying to protect your current identity. Your mind prefers continuity. It prefers to know who you are and how you operate. When you consider moving abroad, your identity loosens. The labels you have grown accustomed to no longer hold the same weight. You may not know who you are in that new context yet. That uncertainty is not weakness. It is openness. Openness allows reinvention. And reinvention is not about becoming someone fake. It is about shedding layers that were built in response to one specific environment. When you change environments, you discover traits that were dormant. You discover capacities that were never required before. You may discover patience in a culture that moves slowly. You may discover confidence in navigating unfamiliar systems. You may discover humility in learning a new language. You may discover independence in solving problems without familiar support. Those discoveries cannot happen if you remain within the same reinforcing structure. You do not need confidence to access those parts of yourself. You need exposure. Exposure begins with decision. There's also something else to confront honestly. If you never decide, you preserve the fantasy. You can always say, I could move abroad if I wanted to. That possibility remains romantic. It remains untarnished by reality. But once you decide and act, the fantasy becomes experience. It becomes tangible. Some people prefer the fantasy because it protects them from disappointment. But fantasy also protects them from fulfillment. If you never act, you never risk failing. But you also never risk thriving. And thriving is not theoretical. It is embodied. Decision is not about recklessness. It is about alignment. It is about recognizing when your internal growth has outpaced your external structure, when your curiosity has outgrown your comfort zone, when your desire for expansion has become persistent rather than fleeting. Persistent desire is information. It is not a passing mood. It is not impulsive. It is your mind repeatedly exploring the same possibility because something in you recognizes potential. You may fear that making a decision will close doors. In some ways, it will. That is what commitment does. It narrows focus. But narrowing focus allows depth. It allows you to invest fully instead of partially. You cannot live two lives simultaneously. At some point, you must choose which version of yourself to strengthen. The version that stays because it is comfortable, or the version that expands because it is curious. Neither is morally superior, but only one stretches you. And stretching is how capacity increases. Confidence is not a magical trait bestowed on certain personalities. It is a residue of repeated exposure to challenge. When you handle difficulty, your brain updates its model of you. It says, we survived that. That update builds identity. If you never expose yourself to challenge, your identity remains fragile. You may appear stable, but your stability is conditional. It depends on predictability. Predictability is not the same as strength. Strength is the ability to remain intact during change. Moving abroad is one of the clearest mirrors for strength because it removes artificial supports. It asks you to respond consciously rather than automatically. It asks you to participate in your own adaptation. And through that participation, you build evidence. Evidence builds confidence. But evidence requires action. You do not need to feel like a different person before you move. Moving is what reveals a different person. You do not need to silence fear before you decide. Decision reorganizes fear. You do not need to be certain. You need to be willing. Willingness is underrated. It does not sound heroic. It does not feel dramatic. But willingness is the doorway to transformation. It is the quiet statement that says, I will engage with growth. And growth changes everything. At some point, you will look back at this phase of hesitation and realize that you were not lacking confidence. You were negotiating with yourself. You were waiting for emotional certainty instead of creating experiential clarity. Experiential clarity comes from movement. Movement builds perspective. Perspective builds resilience. Resilience builds confidence. The sequence is clear once you stop reversing it. If you feel the pull to live abroad, do not wait for fear to disappear. Fear rarely disappears completely. Instead, let the desire for expansion outweigh the desire for predictability. Let curiosity outrank comfort. Let direction outrank doubt. Decision is the pivot point. And once you decide, even internally, your energy shifts. Your research becomes purposeful. Your preparation becomes structured. Your conversations become intentional. You stop imagining and start building. That shift alone is empowering. You begin to see that your life is not a fixed script. It is responsive to choice. And choice becomes real when it is anchored in decision. If you are unsure where you would even begin, that uncertainty does not invalidate the calling. It simply means you need clarity. That is where alignment becomes important. The world is vast. Different countries offer different rhythms, values, structures, and social norms. Some environments amplify stress. Others amplify balance. Some reward intensity. Others reward integration. You do not need to guess blindly. You can understand your own preferences, your own pace, your own psychological wiring. The World Match app exists for exactly that reason. It helps you identify which countries and regions align with your lifestyle, values, mindset, and natural rhythm. Instead of floating in abstraction, you gain grounded insight into where you might genuinely thrive. Decision becomes easier when it is informed. You can take the quiz now at worldmatch.app and begin turning desire into direction. You do not need confidence to begin. You need commitment to explore. Confidence will come later. It will come when you look back and realize that the person who once hesitated is now the person who decided. And that decision changed everything.